All right, Genesis chapter 3. We want to look at, let's see, probably should start at verse 8. Verse 8, and go through verse 19. So we get the full kind of bit of the context there. Somebody want to read 3:8 through 19?
Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But he, Lord God, called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I command you not to eat from?" The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." So the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed you are above all livestock and all the wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all of the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." To the woman he said, "I will greatly increase your pains of childbirthing, for the pain that you have given birth to the child. Above the czar will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." To Adam he said, "Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree above which I commanded you, you must not eat of it. Cursed to the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all of the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat from the plants of the field." Through 19.
19, please.
"By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, and dust you are, and dust you will return."
All right, thank you. All right, so briefly, what happens, bless you, what happens after they eat the fruit, the forbidden fruit? What happens with Adam and Eve? What's going on there? We didn't quite pick that up, but I'm sure everybody remembers what was going on there.
Well, it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
That's right, that's right.
So they got knowledge.
They did. They got knowledge. They got knowledge of what evil is. And what's evil?
Well, evidently being naked.
Well, evidently they are, right? They're evil. Yeah, it wasn't for being naked, that's for sure. But yeah, they recognize that. And then immediately what happens is they realize that they're naked. They realize that they're sinful. They realize what sin is, what rebellion to God is. They experience it. And right away, they try to do what? They try to cover themselves, right, from each other, and then they try to hide from God. And obviously, you can't hide from God, and man cannot cover his own sin. You can't cover your own sin, and you can't hide from God, though we try to. In verse 8, they begin where we began. They hear the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden. They hide. And God comes to them, and he doesn't come in a way that's aggressive. He doesn't come in a way that is condemning or violent or vicious or anything like that. How does he come? How does he come in the garden?
In the cool of the day, he was walking in the garden.
He's walking. He doesn't rush in with a sword to kill him. He doesn't strike lightning bolts, right? He comes walking in. And he starts to have, or he tries to have a conversation with Adam and Eve. And he asks them questions. Now, the questions he asked, does he know the answers already? Where are you? Does he know where they are? Yeah, he knows where they are. What have you done? Does he know what they've done? Absolutely. And when he asks Adam, Adam does what? Does he confess?
No, he blames it on Eve.
He confessed.
Yeah, he confessed, all right. He confessed that the woman did it. And not only the woman, but the woman that you gave me. So there seems to be a double blame going on where the man is not only blaming the woman, but he's also blaming God. And then God asks the woman, what have you done? And she says, you're right, Lord, I did this. I'm sorry I broke your heart. I'm sorry I committed this sin, right? She confesses and she repents, right?
What verse is that?
Yeah.
Move the blame.
She does the same thing. She puts the blame on the serpent. And does God ask the serpent any questions? No, he asks no questions of the serpent, right? He knows that this is Satan. He knows what Satan has done. There doesn't need to be a conversation there. He just brings about judgment now. And in 15, we have the first preaching of the gospel. It's the gospel in a nutshell, right? It's not fully formed. We don't have a big, lecture on the gospel. But in verse 15, we have the beginning of the gospel here where God says, I will put enmity, that's ill will or hatred, between you and the woman. He's speaking to the serpent, speaking to Satan, between you and the woman, and between your offspring or seed, your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So in verse 15, we have the gospel there preached for the first time by God himself. And this is speaking about Christ. There's a singular he in the text. There's one to come. There's going to be this man to come, the seed of the woman, who is going to come and is going to crush the head of the serpent. And if your head is crushed, what does that mean?
You're done for.
Yeah, you're dead. You can live with a crushed leg or hand. You can't live with a crushed head. Your head, you're done.
So first of all, mine says that they are both bruised.
Yes.
Okay, so where do we get the fact that it's being crushed?
It's a translational issue. If you look at multiple translations, some will say bruised, others will say crushed.
So then does that go for the bruised of his heel?
Yes, bruised or crushed heel. It's the same idea that's going on there. Strike, right. When it's your head, it's a death blow.
It can be the same thing to each body part just because it's the head, it's different. It's more severe, correct?
Right. So whether it's bruised or crushed, if your head is bruised, in this context, it's not saying that the serpent's head will be lightly, you got a little bruise on there. Yeah. This is it's meant to be that kind of idea of a stomping, crushing kind of blow. Same thing for the heel. The heel will be crushed or bruised or struck or whatever. It's the same word. It's the same idea going on there. But it is this idea of one is going to be a severe death blow. The other is going to be a hurting, right? There's a wounding that goes on, but it's not going to be the end. Now, this, again, is speaking about Christ. And so the death blow to Satan is when?
When Christ's resurrection.
No, close though. Close to the resurrection. What's close to the resurrection? The crucifixion. The crucifixion, right? The resurrection is, we'll say confirmation, proof, all of that. And really the death, the burial, and the resurrection all kind of go together, right? But specifically it's at the cross. So Jesus on the cross is where he wins that final victory. Colossians 2:15 says, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame, triumphing over them in him. It's talking about what happened at the cross there. In Ephesians chapter 2, 14 through 16, it says, for he himself is our peace, who made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. And again, that's talking about hostility between man and God. But here with this what happens with Adam and Eve, this is the point where the first sin happens, and we all follow in our parents' footsteps. We all follow in Adam and Eve. Our parents, in a sense, we followed in their footsteps. So we continued that along. And what Satan brought, the serpent brought, was this rebellion and all of that. Jesus repairs. He kills or crushes, destroys, takes care of Satan. And it's on the cross that he does that. And there he also brings man back to God. So everything that was undone in Genesis chapter 3 is resolved in the Christ on the cross. That makes sense? So the gospel is preached for the first time here, and it's preached by God himself. Now I want to touch briefly on this idea of offspring. In here it talks about, I'm going to put enmity between your seed and her seed and all of this kind of stuff. Now, we know that ultimately the singular seed that it's talking about is Jesus. We know that from Paul. Paul will talk about that in Galatians and places like that. But there's also this idea of the offspring of Satan as well. And what would or the serpent, but we know that this is Satan in the form of a serpent. So who are the offspring of Satan? His followers. Yeah, so there's two sets in a sense of offspring. Ultimately, the singular offspring is Jesus, we know that. But those who follow after Satan would be considered his offspring, people that are following him. So in Matthew chapter 3 and verse 7, it says, "But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to his baptism, he said," and this is John the Baptist, he said, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" So he's calling them vipers. This, again, is a connection to this idea of the serpent and things like that. What's that? Vipers are a snake.
I remember John did call and brood of vipers.
In Matthew 13:38, it says, "The field is the world," right? Jesus is discussing the parable that he talked about there, but he says, "The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one." That is, the people who follow after Satan, follow after what he would put his stamp of approval on. And then finally in John 8:44, it says, Jesus speaking says, "You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies." So you see that there's a connection between this idea of being the offspring or sons of Satan, that kind of thing. And this, again, is connected to Genesis 3. There's going to be some offspring who follow after. There's going to be people who follow after Satan and do what he would put his stamp of approval on. They would be considered those who follow after. They would be considered sons of or offspring of Satan.
Would you see that initially with, well, I know I'm getting ahead of it, but
Yeah, go ahead.
Cain and then the line of Seth, it
Yes.
seemed to flow in that direction. And
Exactly.
the line of Cain seemed to be a godless,
Mm-hmm.
that would flow like that.
Absolutely.
That offspring.
Absolutely. Remember, is Satan omniscient? Everybody know what omniscient is?
Yes, all knowing.
All-knowing. Is Satan all-knowing?
No,
No.
Is he all-present?
no.
Okay. So when the pronouncement is given to him that your offspring, there's going to be an offspring of the woman to come and crush your head, take you out, does he know that it's going to be Jesus a couple thousand years later? No. How would he know? Why would he know if he's not all-knowing? He wouldn't know. So what does he do? And we haven't gotten there yet, but we're going to get there, but you kind of jumped on it, so let's talk just a moment about it. So as soon as Adam and Eve have offspring, what is he going to do?
Commit murder.
He's going to be tempting, right? He can't
Yeah.
physically do, right? He can't make somebody do, but he's going to be there tempting. And so here we have Cain, and Cain kills Abel, his brother. Bam. Satan is, you know what I mean? He's already attacking the seed of the woman, already, because he doesn't know when Jesus is going to come. He doesn't know that this is, he doesn't know it's Jesus. right? He just knows it's his seed of the offspring. So, of course, he's going to be attacking right away. So, yeah, then you end up with this divergent kind of group, and you end up with Seth. Seth takes the place of Abel. And you've got those two lines. And we'll see what happens with those two lines as we kind of get there. But you're right. You can see those two lines as this kind of same thing that's going on here. There's two lines. There's a godly line, and then there's the ungodly line. There's the seed that would follow the seed of the woman. You know, they'd be godly. And then there would be that line that would follow after Satan. There would be the seed of the serpent kind of idea. Yeah. So absolutely. Should be keeping connections there, yeah.
Am I the only one in here that does feel like Satan is everywhere? I mean, didn't you say?
You're probably not the only one who feels that way.
Because, I mean, in anything and everything you do, everywhere is temptation. That don't we associate that coming from Satan?
You bring up a great point. We do. But should we? Should we give Satan that kind of power? Does the scriptures give him that kind of power? Where does it say Satan is everywhere?
In Job, it says he roams throughout
He
the
roams,
earth,
yeah.
but it doesn't say he's everywhere. It just says that he seemed to be.
Yeah, roams around. Yeah, sure. See, the thing is, what we often do, and this is culturally too, right? Just people who are not Christians, don't know the Bible or anything like that, they give Satan much more power than he deserves. Who is the ruler of hell? Satan is said to, right? Satan is the ruler of, is he really the ruler of hell? No. Hell is a punishment for Satan and his demons. Yeah, that's what, it's not, he doesn't rule that, but we give him more power than we should. He's not God. There's no one like God. God is the only one who is all-knowing, who is all-present. All, you know what I mean? The omnis, when you think about, omniscient, omnipotent, all that kind of stuff. But we often look at Satan in the same light. Really what we end up doing is we are dualists. Yeah, everybody know what a dualist is?
They
No?
duel with swords.
Nope.
No.
But good try. Good try.
Okay.
Good try.
Can't say try.
Yeah, it's you hear the word dual. No, dualism. Have you ever seen that Asian circle and it's got part of it's white and part of it's black? The yin and yang? That's dualism. The idea is that there's a good force and a bad force and they're equal. And that's what we do with Satan and God. We basically say Satan and God are equal and they're just fighting over one. And we may not say it like that, but we think that kind of idea. And so I don't know if you're the only one in this room that thinks that Satan is everywhere, but that's a very common belief. But it's just...
He sure gets around a lot.
Sure. He gets around, but he's not God. And I think we give him too much power a lot of times. He doesn't know all things. He's not all powerful. And he's not everywhere. In fact, when you look at the book of James, if you read the book of James, James will talk about being tempted, and he mentions nothing about Satan. See, we don't need, Satan could drop dead today. All his demons could die today. They'd still be sin. We don't need Satan to sin. We don't.
Says you're tempted by your own evil desires.
Your own desires. Yeah, absolutely. So we don't need him to sin. We don't need him to be tempted. But he is the tempter. He is there, right? So we do have an enemy. But he is not, and this might be something for some of us to wrestle with. If we've thought that he's always had this kind of power, we need to rethink that.
But when you get into Ephesians, though, you get into the cosmic powers.
Yeah.
As if Paul builds that up from just what you're saying, minimizing Satan. It looks like all of a sudden he says it's not flesh and blood, but it's so.
Yeah.
That leads us to think.
Well, we do have a spiritual battle. And Paul's point is our battle isn't against other people. There's something different. It's a spiritual battle that's going on. That's true. Yeah, absolutely. Are there demonic forces? Sure. But here's the thing. If Satan is literally tempting you, he cannot at the same time be literally tempting me. Now, maybe his demons could be, or however that kind of works. We don't really get a full picture of that in the scriptures. But at the end of the day, we really have to remember that Satan is a limited being. He's a created being, which means he's not God. There is only one God.
Right.
So God is not worried about Satan winning. Like, uh-oh, Satan might win. He's just as powerful as me. There's this kind of force back and forth. Like Star Wars, you've got, the light side and the dark side. That's not biblical. The idea that the dark could overcome the light. It can't. Jesus proved that, didn't he, when he was here? Mm-hmm. Could the demons do anything? Except for what whatever he told them to do. And they would beg him to do certain things. If you're going to send us out, send us into the pigs. And he'd go ahead, go. But they needed permission. See, Satan is not. Satan is not on the same level as God. But this is a good conversation to have. This is a good thing to kind of think about and think through.
So then how should we think of Satan? Is it just simply a fallen angel?
I would.
Is
I would look at, now he's powerful. Angelic beings are powerful. We don't want to minimize that, right? If you look at the book of Jude, Jude will say that there's men who blaspheme these glorious beings or whatever, and they don't know what they're doing. They speak evil, and he says that the archangel Michael would not even pronounce a blasphemous judgment against Satan, but simply said, the Lord rebuke you. So we want to be balanced. What we don't want to do is go to one extreme or the other. We don't want to give him more power and more credit than he should get, but we also don't want to think too lightly. Do you know what I mean? He's still a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. So we still have an enemy out there. It's just not the kind of enemy we think of, all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipresent kind of idea that we tend to give to Satan. Go ahead.
But when we're covered in the blood of Jesus and we've been baptized and everything,
Yeah.
Satan has no power over us. It's only what we allow ourselves to do, because he has no power over us.
Well, right. I mean, he has no ultimate power. He can still be a influencer, a tempter, right? He's the tempter. He can still tempt. We simply have to
You don't think
agree
it's
to
our
it.
humanness that tempts us?
Well, I think it's a combination. The scriptures talk about that, right? James talks about that. But also, Paul says we have an enemy who prowls, and he's speaking to Christians, who prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. So we've got the balance. We don't want to fall off the cliff on either side. We want to be balanced in the middle. So we recognize that we can say that, let's say, somebody was tempted, and we say, well, they're tempted by Satan or something like that. As long as we recognize that that may not literally be true. Satan may not literally have been around. Because again, if he's around you, tempting you personally, he couldn't have been around me, tempting me personally at this very same time. You know what I'm saying?
I wanted to ask a question, because if I don't think of it now, I may not think of it.
Go for it. We're already way off base, but
There's a
no,
book,
it's a good question.
There's a book, Joe Beam, Seeing the Unseen. I read it, I don't know how many years ago, and I probably should go reread it.
Mm-hmm.
But in that book, he seemed to indicate a belief that Satan can know your mind. And when I read that, I'd have to go back and look at that. But this is questioning what I agreed with him at the time, that Satan could read your mind, that only God would know the thoughts and intents of my heart, that Satan, in other words, if we're not thinking right, Satan is aware of that. It's aware of our thoughts. And I was wondering in this connection what your thoughts would be about that.
Yeah. Here's where I would land on that idea. If you can show me a scripture that says that, I'm with you on any of this, right? And I could be wrong. I might have missed something in there. But I don't know if he has that kind of power. I mean, I don't know if angelic beings have the ability to read our minds and our hearts. Maybe. I just don't know offhand. Again, offhand, I'd have to know what scripture this man
Yeah,
points to
yeah.
or something like that. And
Yeah.
if somebody else in here says, yeah, it's here, we can look at it. But again, I wonder how much power we give to Satan that really isn't his, that he really doesn't have. So I would question that. Again, I'd be open to it if we find it in the scriptures and say, yeah, here it says he knows our hearts or he knows our thoughts or something, then I'd say, sure. But
We don't,
I don't know
we
about
don't
that.
really know the extent of the power of angels.
We don't.
All angels, any angel.
Yeah, we don't. We know that they're ministering servants for those who will inherit glory, all that kind of stuff. We know that they're created beings, so that they're finite, they're limited. We know that they can't do anything to God. They can't win over Christ or anything like that. But the Bible is silent on a lot of these things. And I think we ought to be silent on a lot of these things as well. Like if, in the sense that there's a lot of books, I could write a book, right, that would sell if it was all about the wonders of angels and demons. People would buy it because the scriptures are limited on what they say. They just don't give a lot of information. And so we start to make our own ideas about what we fill in the gaps is what we like to do. We want to know the fuller picture in the story. Just like the Jews, you can read the legends of the Jews, and they fill in the background of Abraham. They'll tell you, his parent, he was an idol worshiper. They formed idols. That was his job. Does the Bible say that? I don't know anywhere where it says that Abraham was an idol manufacturer. But we have this kind of idea that we want to know more and more. I'll tell you, there's a great book by Jim McGuigan, and it's called Enter the Dragon. And it's all about Satan and stuff. And he talks a lot about this idea about how much power we give to Satan that we ought not to. And how we go to scriptures and we think that there's a biography of Satan, and it's not. It's not we don't have these descriptions that we really want. But at the end of the day, the Bible tells us what's most important. And what's most important is not how Satan fell, what angels can and can't do. What's most important is the redemptive history that God is working out that culminates in Jesus Christ, salvation for human history. These are interesting questions, but...
Well, and then the other thing you see, I don't want to keep asking questions, but rebuking Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Can Christians rebuke Satan?
Jesus did.
Jesus did, yeah. I know that we're told to flee, resist, and he will flee.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting, while you all have been saying this, I found a reference that is going right in lockstep with what you're saying about, it's from Don Stewart on Blue Letter Bible, about what is the extent of Satan's power. Number one, not the opposite of God, you covered that. He approaches as a subordinate, which we see in the garden. He doesn't even, the serpent had been speaking before. He didn't say a word. Mm-hmm. It's not only that God not talked to the serpent didn't talk to God.
Right.
He cannot tempt without God's permission. That's from Matthew 4:1. Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He also could not tempt Job without God's permission, where God said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power, only to do not lay a hand on his person."
Mm-hmm.
He cannot influence nature without God's permission. And that reference is, when it came to influencing nature, Satan was not able to do it without God's permission. That was from Job 1:12. He can't physically harm without God's permission. Again from Job. He can't kill without without God's permission. Again from Job. Because when the Lord said to Satan very well, he is in your power, only spare his life. He can't touch at all without God's permission, again from Job.
Mm-hmm.
He can't mention believers' name without permission, and that's from Job. He cannot force believers to do anything, and that's from Acts. He references 26:18, and he cannot read our thoughts. And this was interesting to read in Isaiah. Have you not known, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary, his understanding is unsearchable. And then in 1 Kings 8:39, then here in heaven, your dwelling place, forgive, act, and render to all whose hearts you know, according to all their ways, for only you know what is in every human heart.
I saw that one, that reference.
Yeah. And then 11, he does not know the future. That's from Isaiah 46:9 and 10. Does not know what we dreamed. That's from Daniel 2:27 and 28. And he is a coward from James 4:7. And believers are victorious from 2 Corinthians 2:14. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so kind of goes along with what we were talking about, right in line with the things we were talking about. Yeah, so we give Satan a bit more credit and power than he really should. But pick up Jim's book. It's well worth reading. Go ahead.
But by the same token, he is very powerful.
Yes.
Because in Ephesians 6, it says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms.
Yes.
So, Satan's bigger than himself, isn't he?
Yeah, Paul's point there is that it's not against the person you're having an argument with, a fight with, that there's spiritual things going on. And yeah, absolutely. He says that Satan is prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So Peter. So there is power there, certainly. And that's what I said. We've got to balance that. We've got to be careful. We don't give him too little. We don't think too little of this. He's an angelic being. They're pretty powerful beings. But we also don't want to go the opposite direction and think.
Michael, the archangel, like you said, wouldn't even bring an accusation against him. We need to be careful what we say too.
I would agree with you, which is why I brought out that point in Jude.
What we say about Satan?
What we say against?
Michael, the archangel,
Yeah.
where is that?
It's in Jude.
In Jude, he wouldn't even bring an accusation against the devil.
Yeah.
And so we need to be careful how we handle that situation.
I was wondering about that because I was wondering if we could make fun of Satan.
Yeah, I wouldn't because of what Jude says.
That's very interesting because he's been beaten.
He's been beaten,
He's
sure.
been totally
Crushed, as you say. And he's the accuser of the brethren. And when you're accused by something, you have a court to stand in, which is Jesus, which makes Satan nothing.
That's right.
Which is a buffoon, which is ridiculous.
Well, we let God handle that. We let Jesus do that.
Yes, but by the cross. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about.
There's a balance.
Yeah.
See, here's the thing, and this is what we're talking about. We've got to have a balanced perspective. We can't think too highly of him, more powerful than he is. We shouldn't think too lowly of him, like he's got no power, there's nothing going on. Like, oh, I can do whatever I want. Satan will never, tempt me. We've got to be careful.
I need, I guess, a little more clarification on the idea of Michael not bringing accusations against the devil. I know we don't know, and maybe that's part of the problem. We don't know why he wouldn't bring an accusation. There's got to be more there than the fact that he's a devil or an angelic being.
In Jude, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be because he's an angelic being. Read Jude, and the comparison that Jude is making is that there are these elders, I believe he's talking about elders, that there are these shepherds in the church who are wicked and ungodly, and they're defiling themselves and others, and one of the things they do is they blaspheme the glorious beings, angelic beings, and they don't know what they're doing. And then he says, not even Michael the archangel, when he was in disagreement with Satan over the body of Moses, would bring a blasphemous judgment or something along those lines against Satan. He simply said, the Lord rebuke you. That's it. So Jude's point, you'd have to go double check it and read it, right? But Jude's point is to make a comparison that we ought not to speak about things that we don't know. We shouldn't.
Ooh, that's bad news.
Yeah.
We talk about too much things we don't know.
Yeah. We shouldn't speak about beings in a way that we don't understand. But that's the point. Real quick, go ahead.
I've already talked.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to know what Jim McQuiggan's book was, the name of it.
Enter the Dragon. I believe that's what, Enter the Dragon. Yeah, because Satan is called the dragon in Book of Revelation. I believe that's what it is, Enter the Dragon. Yeah.
One more thing, Tim, one of his references, does it say that the Lord gives Satan power at times over the weather?
Yeah, that's from Jude, from Job. In the book of Job, Satan is allowed to do certain things with the weather because God allowed him to do it, like kill off his crops and his animals and that, Job's animals or whatever. You have to reread Job, but yeah.
I wonder if that includes hurricanes.
Well, at least in that context, probably something along those lines, some kind of a natural, what we would call a natural disaster was going on there. Something like that, yeah. But we got to be careful thinking that tornadoes are the work of Satan, that God has allowed Satan to bring to you. Do you know what I mean? Like, just because there's one example of that does not necessarily mean that God continues to allow him to do those kind of things. I think the point of that was just to say that Satan is on a leash, we could say. Satan is not allowed to just do whatever he wants, however he wants, have all kinds of power and stuff. He literally, according to Job anyways, has to ask permission for certain things. And God allows certain things. He allows him to do certain things. Again, working out all his goodwill through it all, but how he does that?
That's what I was going to ask. Why do you think God lets him, why does God grant him that power to do those things when generally when we think about it, they're all usually bad things at the time at least? I guess because it's got a better outcome in the end.
I would say in Job, God is betting on Job. God is saying, this is my guy. I know he's not going to, so he allows him that. Whether God continues to allow, see again, that's just one specific example. We've got to be careful extrapolating that and saying, that's how God continues to work today. That may not be the case. The book of Job is to show us that righteous people suffer for no sin. Job was a righteous man. He suffered. It wasn't because he'd done anything wrong. So that's why the book of Job is really there, to show us that people suffer. The righteous suffer, and it's not because the righteous has some secret sin that they've done. It could be God is allowing Satan to do something for some reason. It could just be other reasons, but the righteous suffer. And it doesn't have to be, if you happen to get a disease, some sickness, right? My first thought shouldn't be, oh, you've sinned, right? Some grievous sin. You know what I mean? Like, the people of God, righteous people do suffer, and it's not always related to some sin.
Tornadoes and hurricanes, they're not the result of Satan, but wouldn't you say they're the result of the fall?
Yes. Yep. Trying to get back. We're trying to get back to Genesis.
Very patient, James.
No, and the reason I allowed it to kind of continue to go on is because it really is an important one. So I appreciate you bringing up the question, and I appreciate the thoughts and the discussions on it. I want to ask that you continue to think about those things going forward. Maybe this is a great study for yourself. Grab Jim's book, look at some of these texts, and ask yourself, does Satan have these powers that we sometimes attribute to him? Kind of examine that kind of stuff. Let me get through a couple more verses. I like that clock better than mine. So I'm going with that one.
You got 5 minutes.
I got 5 minutes. This one's like you're out of time. All right, so in verse 16, what does God say to Eve? We're kind of getting back into Genesis here. What does God say to Eve? What's that?
Punishment.
There's judgment that's coming around. So God is now bringing about judgment on everybody. He starts with Satan. Satan is the one here who's done the tempting, right? The serpent, all of that. So he starts with the serpent, and then he moves on to Eve, and Eve is going to have judgment. And what's her judgment? What is going on here?
She has severe pains during childbirth, and she would desire her husband only, and he would rule over her.
Yeah, so there's going to be pain. So pain enters the picture. With sin comes pain. There's suffering now that's getting involved here. Then there's also this desire, and there's debate over what exactly this is talking about. Some people, and you may even have a footnote that says, could be translated something like, she's going to want to desire control. A desire for a husband, a control over us, something along those lines. So some people, and again, it's a tough one. You have to wrestle with it. Some think that what this means is the woman is going to try to usurp authority in the household. Now that's shocking to me that would ever be even thought of. I don't know why anybody would think that would be the case, right? I mean, women would never, ever.
I feel that way too.
I'm telling you, yeah. I'm shocked that this would be the case. I think that may be very well what's going on here. That the desire would be for the woman to lead in the household. Does that tend to be the case, ladies? Yeah, no?
Depends on where they want to lead, I guess.
Yeah. Depends on where the man wants to lead, right? I might have to tell him where to go. I just drive the boat, right? He might need a captain on the side of him. So it does seem to be, and this isn't universal, right? There's always exceptions to the rule. But it does seem to be a tendency that women will definitely take control of the situation. And men tend to do what? Passive. And allow it. Right. So I'm of the view that I think that's what's going on here, that there's going to be there's a breakdown in the household, and the woman is going to want to usurp this authority. So there's part of this going on here. What does God say to Adam in verses 17 through 19? 17 through 19.
Because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Okay, so real quick, because I know the kids are itching to get in here. Here is the curse that happens. There's a curse on the ground. There's going to be pain and toil that goes along with the work. Now the creation itself has changed. There's thorns and thistles. That wasn't a thing that happened before. Now it's there. And ultimately, there will be physical death. All bad. All bad. Let me leave you with this thought. Genesis chapter 2, life was fabulous. When they were in the garden with God and they were following God's command, He had provided everything for them. As soon as they sin brings in all kinds of destructive things. Pain and suffering and divisions in the family, a loss of all kinds of things, and a lot of pain and suffering, and ultimately death. Sin is a bad thing, and there's where it's a bad thing. It destroys all kinds of things. It destroys relationships, and it brings about suffering. So let's close in prayer. Mike, could you do that for us?